welcome to episode 96 of The Route, presented by White Whale Marketing. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that has a new guest every episode as they share their experiences and route in sports. I'm Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. As always, before we begin, a couple things to cover. First off, if you haven't already, follow us on social media. That's at The Route Sports, all major platforms. If you're listening to this podcast, obviously you want to get involved in sports business, if you're trying to grow your network. So check us out on LinkedIn. Maybe you can get some connections there and you start growing your network a bit better. Secondly, if you haven't already, you're listening to this podcast, hopefully you're a fan of it, subscribe, right? So whether that's on audio platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, etc. But we're also on YouTube via video. That's going to be at the White Whale Marketing channel, so White Whale MKTG. We have the Route playlist there. And just, like, comment, leave reviews, and that's always good. Before we get into today's guest, let me tell you about Betstamp. If you're someone who likes to place a couple bucks on your favorite team, listen up. Don't be a fool like me, where I was using only one sportsbook while I was betting all season, and I'd place a bet, and I'd watch TSN at intermission, and their sponsor would have better odds than what I placed. The solution: use Betstamp to compare the best available odds amongst all sportsbooks. The only way you're going to get an edge in online sports betting is by having an account with multiple sportsbooks. So download the Betstamp app or go to betstamp.app/Ontario and use the code WHALE so you can get access to their affiliates and their prices. So with Betstamp, it allows you to verify the existence of a proposed bet with the corresponding odds. This provides you to buy and sell picks with full transparency. Users selling sports picks on Betstamp do not sacrifice any royalty or cut to the app. It's completely free. So again, if you want an edge in sports betting, use Betstamp by downloading their app or visiting betstamp.app/Ontario using the code WHALE to get access to their affiliates and their pricing. Check it out. With that, we can now get into today's guest. I'd now like to welcome someone who has also found themselves behind a podcast mic when it comes to sharing stories of people within sports. Founder and host of the Athletes Podcast, David Stark. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, as every episode kind of starts, and as it should, take us through your route. So, where did this begin of, what did you attend for, post-secondary or high school, and how did we get here today where, you're the host of an Athletes Podcast?
Yeah, my route is unique in the sense that I left high school in 2015, graduated, and knew pretty firmly that I was going to Brock University for the sport management program. And I had a desire to learn the sport business world. And this is a program that people knew about, people were enthralled about on the West Coast. It didn't require a math prerequisite, so it was attractive for a lot of hockey guys that were like, hey, I can avoid taking this course in grade 12. And I was always into sports growing up, never really good enough to make it to that next level, but played basically everything between volleyball, hockey, baseball, cricket, you name it. And I realized I just had a passion for sports and for athletics and what sport can bring to other individuals and the youth, essentially. And I realized that, now I have an opportunity to go into a university, bigger setting, larger scale, nearly 20,000 people, join the Brock Athletics Association and started emceeing events, bringing people, hosting people to social events that were getting people out to the games, just doing everything that I could within that institution to up level that. And there was a ton of people involved in the We Are Ready program, it was called. And we really had a good core culture there that I think instilled a lot of knowledge and kind of desire to build something. And I love the idea of building things. I think that's a real opportunity that people don't necessarily take up when they're young, and the power of compound and the power of just doing something on a consistent basis week over week can be very powerful in the long run. So I realized that that was something that I could do. Went down between first and second year, took a a baseball internship with the Corvallis Knights down in Corvallis, Oregon, playing out of Oregon State University. Worked there for free for 3 months. Realized that that was another cool opportunity to just meet a ton of people, learn in a new country, be with a billet family for 3 months, and understood pretty quickly at that point that it was like, okay, this is something that I feel like I'm good at, building relationships with people, having these conversations. Didn't matter what the sport was, people were passionate about sports. So at that point, finished Brock University sport management program. Had been working at the Buffalo Canoe Club for a couple of years, which is a sailing yacht club, kind of an ironic name. Didn't actually have any canoes until 2018, and isn't actually located in Buffalo. So, I was managing junior activities programs there for a couple of years, and that was another beast on its own because it's a not-for-profit organization dealing with 95% American customers, i.e. members, and then balancing different workloads, different timelines, 16 employees at that point, like $250,000 P&L budget that you're responsible for. Like all of these things get thrown at you at a young age, and you're like, okay, I got to deal with this quickly. And for me, it was a chance to grow up early, and I was ready for it, but I don't think I absorbed as much as I could have. Looking back, hindsight's 2020. It is what it is. And so I realized after school that I wanted to continue having these conversations. Wasn't going to make it pro in anything, so figured I'd try and start talking to those people instead and learn what they would do, how they see success, what it's taken to get there, the timeline, work ethic, tips, tricks, pieces of advice. Because I wish I had a resource like that 10 years ago when I was growing up. So that's who I'm always trying to scratch that inner itch for, is that 12, 15, 17-year-old athlete who wants to get that inner piece of knowledge that could benefit them in the long run.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And there's some interesting things there where, like, this is a little off topic here. Did you say cricket? As in, like, that's a sport you played growing up?
Man, we had a program at high school for a couple elementary school. Might have been like grade 7 and 8. 1 year high school, 1 year elementary, and yeah, we played cricket like on and off for a couple of weeks and like randomly. But we were in Surrey, BC, which has a heavy Indian population, so that was a sport that was custom there, and we were a part of it and part of the culture, and really cool opportunity, because now I can have a conversation with someone who plays cricket, and I might not know much. I'd probably have to do my research, but at least I could, be able to say I swung the paddle, I believe they refer to it as. They probably have a different reference. I'll probably get shamed on this later, but that's okay.
Yeah, I know that's interesting because I have buddies from Australia, and obviously cricket is massive to at least one of them. And I remember like them trying to tell me the rules, or even just the paddle bat. I forget what they call it, and like just show me how to do it. But so interesting. But especially being like growing up in Canada, like saying BC definitely makes sense. But it's still interesting to hear. But yeah, I guess maybe just starting back with at the beginning of route when you're saying, hey, you're finishing high school here, and you already knew, you're like, hey, I'm going to attend Brock, and specifically I want to go to the sport management or program there. And I wanted to maybe break that down a bit more, because obviously a lot of people listening are either young professionals or those entering university, and then they're deciding, hey, like which school, which program should I attend? Was there any like wavering of, hey, like maybe a different school or maybe another program? I know you mentioned the math, that was a big thing, but is there any other like deterrent of whether to go to Brock or not?
I, to be honest, applied at 2 universities, and I don't even actually think I finished the second application, which was really dumb on my part in hindsight. But I applied to Concordia, or didn't apply to Concordia actually, but that was the other one. But Brock, I had a feeling. I don't know what it was. It was intuition at grade 11, I believe. It was like, just knew that was the right program, right fit, grade 12, whatever it was. And Um, yeah, I just knew that I needed to get out and do my own thing. I was cranking at the door to get out from under my house, and that was nothing against like what my parents had done. They'd educated me, they'd provided me with everything that I needed and could have ever asked for. But I wanted to go prove it that I could do it myself. Probably some ego there involved, but it's part of the game, right? And I felt like the only way to do that was to get away and move to the big city, that being Toronto, or at least close by in St. Catharines, or what I thought was close.
Yeah.
Again, it was a great school though, right? Like it was exactly what I needed. It was close enough to Toronto that we made the trip up a couple of times every year for sure, probably more like 15, 20 times. But, like it was integral to have that as like your sticking point that you want to continue to work towards and strive for, because I think it's important to have goals, and not big for writing them down necessarily, or I haven't been as of yet. I really should.
Yeah.
But I think even just having those mental notes is important, and keeping yourself accountable in one way, shape, or form. However you have to do that, whether it's writing them down, whether it's sharing it with your accountability partner, like whatever it takes to make sure you can reflect on that and see that you're constantly improving.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And kind of sticking back to at the beginning, I kind of relate to that when you're saying, you're picking what program or what you can do after school. And I always wanted to go into business. I always dead set if I was going to be an athlete, I was going to go be an accountant. My parents were accountants, and they seemed pretty happy with that. So I knew I had to do the math if I was going to get into a bachelor's program. But kind of similar to what you're saying, I was trying to avoid it as at any point I could, right? So we had to take advanced math, and I was trying to find ways not to do it. And then eventually you had to do it. And I'm glad I did, because I got to business school. But I'm sure that's something a lot of people listening kind of face as well. But then what you said, once you were in university, I think that's something that you learn with hindsight. The program necessarily, the diploma isn't the biggest thing. It's more so what you do and like the experiences you gain. And that's something you touched on too, right? Where you got involved with the different I forget what association, the Athletes Association, is that what you said?
Yeah, just like part of their education, or the university athletics. So I was emceeing basketball, hockey events, like pumping up the crowd, doing random stuff like to get people going, as they say, and provide a little excitement at the games, because I was used to being the athlete participating. So I had so much of this energy and desire to sound and to be active and to like contribute in some way, shape, or form to the outcome of the game. And that was my way of being like, yeah, I made an impact, right? And like, there were games where we definitely got people going, and it's fun when you can create an atmosphere. Like we filled Bob Davis Gymnasium with like 1,250 students, which at the time sounded crazy. And like,
Mhm.
It isn't, like 1,250 people is not an insane number. College basketball down in the NCAA fills, 40,000 stadiums. But like
Mhm.
from a CIS, now U Sports perspective, to get 1,250 people to a basketball game when basketball culture wasn't really there. And there were a
Yeah.
couple of guys like Mo Hassan and Bowie Nasame that like were part of that integral pieces. And like, but just getting that kind of buy-in from an entire institution is motivating as heck to get.
Mhm.
And like to see what you can achieve when you bring people together around one common goal is really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, no, that for sure makes sense. And like, to be honest, it's one of those things that I didn't come to, let's say, grips with, or even like figure out when I was in university until I think my very last semester. Like I didn't even know about the sports business club at U Ottawa, where I was, in the business school. I was trying to get my degree, and I got to the point with my degree where I started doing like my personal brand, and I was thinking about the podcast. I was like, oh, you know what? Let me just get out of school, because I realized I just want experience now. So I was thinking, like, let me just go get real world experience. But in my last semester, that's when I realized there's things like these clubs or helping out and volunteering, that different things like that to, even like boost the kind of skill sets you're having and working towards a common goal, as you're saying. So definitely agree with that. And I think that's something that, if you're a student listening, that's something you should look at, and not just kind of focus the whole time on getting that diploma and getting out of there, right? So there's some
Yeah.
value while you're in school for sure.
School's
Um,
like so underrated, and like it's getting a bad rep right now because it's expensive and you're not in person, like you're getting Zoom classes, and that isn't great. Like, I'll be frank, but like in person, attending
Yeah.
events, being in like that social setting for a couple of years when you're young is like the closest thing you're ever going to get to a vacation, but also like an opportunity to really learn, taste a bunch of different things, find out what you're passionate about, figure out, hey, like, could I study this? Could I apply research to this? Could I learn about this subject even deeper? Could I teach this subject in the future? Like, those are all things that you can be thinking about as you're going through school, and just opens so many doors afterwards because you're never going to have that much free time again in your life.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Where, like, I think the episode that's going to be coming out right before yours, that's something they said. They're an executive within the OHL, and they're just saying like you got to maximize the title of being a student, right? Because how often when you're 30, you're not going to be able to, no offense to anyone who's 30 that's listening, but you're not going to be able to, go to a pro team and be like, hey, like, I'm a student. Can I come in and like, shadow you for a day or like learn like the craft, or even just, hey, like, can I work for free, or, can I get a part-time job working for you guys and helping out in any capacity that I can? Because they expect you to make mistakes when you have the title of being a student, right? Because you're expected to be learning and, being a sponge and soaking it all in. But if you're, a university, you're in your late 20s, mid 20s, 30, 40, 50, whatever, that's going to be a little harder to do because they're like, hey, like, shouldn't you be providing us with some value at the beginning here? So that's when, you got to leverage that title and make the most of it. Even like what you're saying, just figure things out, like who you are, what you're interested in, and just go on from there.
Yeah, and I think you can like provide value at any age, at any stage of your life, right? Like, and if you come from a perspective when you don't need the money right now, like obviously you want to pay your bills and like financially you have to be responsible, but outside of like your immediate needs, having a roof over your head, food in your fridge, water to drink, like you can get very creative with your time. And if you can provide value to people and work for free and showcase enough value, you're going to get paid. Like, it's not a matter of if, it's providing you're working with someone who is a decent human being. Like, the way I approach things is like, hey, if you can showcase to me that you can generate income to provide a source of revenue for this business, then you deserve a portion of that business that you've developed. And if you can do that immediately going into an organization, then there's no reason why they shouldn't want to pay you after you do that. Like, people just are expecting to be given the title and then start working the job. Like, start working that job prior. It might seem weird to come to an OHL event, networking event, and you're like, hey, director of sales, I just wanted to let you know that like I have a cousin, uncle, friend, whoever who's looking to buy a pair of season tickets, and I'm also looking to apply for this job. Like, could you imagine how much better that resume looks? There's a little star on that because that kid just also provided you with 2 season tickets sold for the entire year, right? And like, you can apply that to anything. But I think where I was getting at is like, think outside of the box in ways that you can provide impact and value to whatever organization, system, professional setting you want to get into, whether that's a hockey team, whatever.
I definitely agree. That's how I kind of got my starts within sports, right? Where I was in accounting initially, and then I swapped over where I didn't have the marketing experience like my classmates at the time. But then I was like, oh, screw it. Like, I don't care. Like, I saved up my money from my accounting job. I'm like, I'll go work for free now in sports. Like, I just want to get in this now. And that's how you start opening the doors, right? So definitely agree with you on that aspect. And I guess kind of building on that, right? Earlier you were saying, hey, like, you really enjoyed building things, whether it's with an organization or it's with yourself. But is this something with the podcast? Is that something where it generated, when you're in school, you're like, hey, like, this is something I would like to start? Or like, how did that formulate and how did that begin?
I realized that I had an opportunity with the job that I was working at the canoe club, that I was going to have a downtime in the winter. So it was a very seasonal job, but it was still a salary role. And I knew I needed something to keep me busy in the winter outside of work so that I stayed out of trouble. because you're in St. Catharines, Ontario, right? And you're like, winter, long, hard, cold. Anyway, I'm like, okay, this is something I could do. And I realized that, if I continue having these conversations with people, we've got a team around it now. Like Jordan's been with me from the beginning, basically, when we were recording our first episode with like a shoebox and a iPhone and just ridiculous setup. Anyway, it's like the thought of having the ability to create something over time has always been intriguing. And I saw Gary Vaynerchuk talking a lot about the fact that podcasts were going to be huge and that this is something that you should be doing. And there were millions being made. 2019, there were millions being made for sure. And I was kind of like late to the game almost when it comes to podcasts. But I realized I'm like, you know what? I'm still so young. I don't even care if, they're 30, 40, 50. They've got a huge following. It's like we have the power of time on our side. And even if we start a little later, we're going to be so much ahead of the game, when we get to, mid 20s, late 20s, when we can fully make that switch to be making it our sole source of income and sole business objective. Like right now, still managing a full-time job, trying to scale out this media outlet, essentially, trying to bring on partners who are aligned with our vision and goal, trying to showcase what athletes are doing on a weekly basis, provide value, create that content, redistribute that content on multiple platforms. You know what it's like. It's a full-time job just managing social media for this stuff. Then you're also responsible with reaching out to these athletes to get them on the show. You're having to reach out to all these individuals. There's a reason why it's tough to do on a weekly basis. It's like if there was another podcast, aligned with The Route, it would be The Grind. And like it's a grind. Like no one realizes, to your point earlier before we went on air, like it's not easy to do on a weekly basis, and it's not ideal when you're having to record after hours, after you're done working, and coordinating with people who maybe aren't the most efficient with how they can set up their schedules. Like you name it, there's barriers left, right, and center. But I think the cool part about what it can showcase to you is like what the power of compounding, the power of time on your side, and the power of just like having a desire to learn about it, right? Like you're just curious, right? That's why you're doing this podcast. You're interested in marketing. You're interested in different opinions, perspectives, viewpoints. Like all of those things can provide you with so much knowledge later on. Just having that, like having these conversations, it really doesn't, like the content, sure, it's great, but like, the fact that I can now talk to Chris Nascimento and be like, hey, like this is a relationship now. And like, it's not just hitting a number for episodes and downloads and views and likes. It's like, okay, like how many people have we been able to impact through this now?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Where, when you kind of step aside, and if you're not doing it for the views or the listens, like at the end of the day, I was kind of, and I'm sure I've said this on other episodes in the past, but at the end of the day, like I was going on coffee chats and having these exact same conversations. I was like, hey, how can I have a conversation with someone over Zoom or Zencaster for this that's in Toronto, that's in Europe, that's in New York, when they're getting reached out to by, hundreds, if not thousands, depending on their position, of going for coffee chats per year, right? But when you kind of have that value exchange, like, yeah, sure. And then I'm just curious, like you're saying, I just want to learn from all these people and like hear their perspectives and see what I can apply to myself. But at the same time, then I was speaking to an executive that I had on the podcast in Europe, and they're telling me ever since the podcast, now when he goes into meetings, people are like, hey, like I listened to you on the route, and like like we know you're interested in this kind of things, and this is how you kind of to work and manage. So when he was telling me yesterday, because he called me, he was like, you know what? Now because of your podcast, he's like, I started listening to a podcast, and I look for like, let's say he's gonna meet with Pepsi or something, or some big brand for the club he works for. He looks and tries to find episodes with that person in it, so he like knows who he's kind of engaging with ahead of time. So like there's so much value, like you're saying, and completely agree. Where we definitely have time on our side in that aspect. But how did it kind of formulate? Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but a little sales
No.
tip here, like for prospecting or for reaching out in a cold email or cold call, like having background knowledge from someone's podcast is like probably converts 10x on any other method of outreach, just simply because it shows you did your due diligence on your end and like we're willing to reach out.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And even like touching on what we said before, when you're a student, I remember when I went to a networking event, someone at MLSE was telling me, he's like, almost create like a scouting report of who's going to be at the event, right? And then when you kind of go from there, like you're almost just, you're trying to impress them with the due diligence, like you were saying earlier on. So definitely agree with that. But then kind of going back to your podcast, what made you decide, hey, let me do an athlete specific podcast? Like obviously you're saying that the whole podcast, format was of interest to you. Well, how did
Mm-hmm.
decide to pick this a particular topic?
Like I said, I knew I wasn't going to make it myself. So I was decided early that I wanted to chat with those people in lieu. And I think it was just the opportunity that, hey, this isn't being done.
Yeah.
I think I can fill a void. I can help educate, entertain, and inspire the next generation of athletes. Like that is legitimately something that is feasible, as crazy as it sounds, that like there isn't another source out there that provides the same level of insight and maybe the same specific questions that we do. And, with some of the other stuff that we're building, like the app on the back end, and like we've got some projects that we've got in the works on the go. And like that, once that starts to roll out, it's the podcast is just the media outlet, right? And then at that point, we're showcasing all of the incredible stories that go on around the world regarding athletes that maybe don't get the same amount of attention that they should. And it's interesting because you said like a specific to athletes podcast. Like we, to my detriment at the beginning, started with a very broad subject in athletes. Like there's hockey podcasts, there's basketball, there's baseball, there's like, man, you name it, there's hundreds out there. But I'm like, okay, I don't really love any sport that much more than the other one. I love to play golf, I love to play hockey, basketball, but like I'm down if you want to talk to me about stand-up paddleboarding and like the benefits from a physiological, like muscular, like whatever standpoint you want to talk to me about. Like I'm interested, whether it's high performance, hot, cold therapy. And to me, I was like, okay, here's a unique opportunity to have these conversations with all these incredible human beings, top performers at every level, to also satisfy like a need for this education out there, to not necessarily glamorize what these people are doing. Like training twice a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year is not how professional athletes train. But sometimes in the media and the way they're marketed by, some individuals in marketing isn't actually the way they're training on a day-to-day basis. And they're not necessarily eating the way that Gatorade commercial showcases the way they're eating, right? Like we all know that some Toronto Raptors are sponsored by Skippy. Perfect example. Yeah. I doubt that Scotty Barnes is crushing a Skippy sandwich every single Saturday. Like, sorry, it's just, that's probably not within their diet. I mean, maybe it is, and maybe there's someone listening who will correct this, but there's like this opportunity to be like, okay, there's these great things that are happening out there. There's a huge opportunity to showcase these incredible people off, and an opportunity to scratch my own itch. Like ultimately I want to learn this stuff. I want to apply it. I ultimately think I can probably be a pretty damn healthy human being over the next 50 years if all I do is talk to the best athletes in the world and the best coaches, nutritionists, you name it, and like learn and apply what they have to offer. Like from a selfish standpoint. And like,
No, no.
you know,
I get that. It's basically like we have like that similar like interest in the conversations we're having. We're just looking at having different conversations with different types of people. But I kind of get that completely, right? Because we're kind of in a similar position from that aspect. But something that you did touch on, I find, not that it wasn't, but this thing in particular, I was like, wow, like, I'd like to hear more about this. Where do you see this going, right? You're kind of touching, have things in the works. You're looking at building an app. Let's say, I don't know, you give me a timeline, 5, 10, 30 years from now. Where do you see this becoming? Like, I'd love to hear that. I'd love hearing these visions.
I'll take a page out of Jordan Shallow's book, who I just chatted with on my show for episode 126. And he kind of said that he had gotten lucky throughout his process. And I was doing some reflecting before this show because I hadn't done it in a while, and it's important to reflect every once in a while. And I realized I've also gotten lucky. Like, COVID occurred where we went from doing the majority of our episodes in person in my bedroom to then online via Zoom. It was a new method of like having to connect with people because I'm just shooting out DMs left, right, and center, hoping someone's going to say yes to coming onto my podcast, and it allowed us to scale quickly. So, we started jumping into Clubhouse conversations and like got linked up with Mikey Taylor and like, who's a top 10 skateboarder ever, like in the world. And, that's, have that conversation. You get in touch with like a guy like Brad Keller, who's a starting pitcher for the Kansas City Royals. And like I said, it's like week over week when people see a passion for something and they see that it's not going anywhere and they see the momentum that's being built. The people that 2 years ago were laughing at what was happening, having a conversation with someone in your bedroom a year ago were kind of seeing, oh, wow, he's sticking to it, but, there hasn't been a ton happening over the past 6 months, to now at this point, 2.5 years, where you start to gain more momentum because you get a couple other big episodes. And like, I use the term big because people refer to like you getting a big get on your episode as like a guest. And it's such a weird term because you realize when you have conversations like this, that sometimes the biggest gets are the least interesting podcasts to listen to. And, it's funny because at the end of the day, like you can take something from every conversation that you have, whether it's the way that person handled that conversation, the perspective they took on, what was given to them, whatever the case may be. Like you can look back and be like, oh, that person was onto something, or that person has a phenomenal way of answering questions despite maybe not addressing the real question, or just random stuff. Like people take themselves so seriously, and I'm guilty of it all the time. But I love having people check me on it because it's a reality check and you realize like, hey, what we're doing on a daily basis in life is hard. Anything you add on top of that makes it harder. Yeah. So pat yourself on the back every once in a while. You've got 96 episodes out now with this show. That's incredible. Like I'm sure you're going to have a celebration at 100. If you're not yet, do it. Yeah. I didn't do it enough. I featured fucking Bruce Boudreau on my episode, and sorry if I'm not allowed to swear, but like,
it's all good.
I had a coaching legend, an NHL, AHL legend, like again in our house for the 100th episode. And that's a crazy thing to do, but when you have those conversations, they lead to more conversations and you build relationships, and you never know what someone in the future is going to be able to do for you when you do something for them without expecting anything in return.
No, I completely agree, right? Where kind of maybe using myself as an example, just to kind of, relate to what you're saying. A lot of the times, like sometimes, like let's say there's a guest with they work for a huge company that have like an incredible position where they have a huge following, but then, you're not having that same connection. But then I remember there's this one episode that kind of sticks to mind where I'm like, hey, like this person was great, but their network was kind of small, anything like that. But I'm like, you know what? Doesn't matter. Like, I enjoyed talking to them. That episode blew up. I think people just heard like how real it was and what they were saying. That episode like ended up being like the best episode we've ever had. And I was
Nice.
like I was shocked by it, and then I completely see that too. Where now like I don't really go into the episodes expecting something in return. But some of the connections are, like you were saying earlier on, the relationships you're building now, where you can actually go hit up this person or ask them a question. Where like last week, I hurt my knee playing soccer, and then I was talking to this like the guy I met from Red Bull, Alejo, and we are talking about like meniscus injuries, and he's saying, hey, like if you ever need something, like when you're in Toronto, I'll give you a tour of the Red Bull thing, and I'll also send you a rehab routine that I use that really helped me with my meniscus, so I can play soccer again. So it's just kind of like weird things like that where you never know where it goes. But no, definitely see that. But
Yo, you should tell him I have a podcast that talks with people like that. He should talk with me.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, if there's any guests that you're interested in, just let me know.
No, I'm kidding. It's that's the cool part though, right? Like
yeah.
like you said, there's unlimited opportunities when you lead with a giving foot forward.
For sure. Or knee. But yeah.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. Yeah, so I kind of like wrapping up each episode. I lied at the beginning. I said there's only one scheduled question. There's two questions I like to ask to everyone at the end as well. So I always say in my mind, I'm set. I'm going to 103. I'm going to be in my rocking chair and then I'm going to go from there. But the question I like to ask is, let's say you join me. We're both 97s. We make it to what? The year 2100. That's crazy to think of. But I just clicked on that. But we're there in our rocking chair, and you're thinking back to that shook me a little bit. But
yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so you're in your rocking chair, you're thinking back to the career you've had so far, the podcast you've been able to grow. What's one maybe episode? What's one thing from this career you're building up in the world of sports that you're gonna look back on like, wow, I couldn't believe like that was part of my life?
Oh, dude. I'm only 25, man. Like you're talking
so far. I'm talking so far. I'm sure there's better.
Up to this point. Up to this
point. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen. I'm hoping better stories take place.
Yeah. Like it might be pretty boring, but
I hope you don't peak now. But
no, dude, I think just it'll come down to one thing that I'll leave it with is like I'm working on building out a foundation, and this is the first time I've said it anywhere publicly, but it's in the works. And the goal is to provide scholarships to athletes and to scale that out like on a larger scale. And that's kind of what I'll say for right now. But hopefully we have another conversation between now and 2100, and we'll be able to give an update to the Route listeners on what that looks like and kind of the details involved. But that'll be my biggest piece, is just the impact we can have from an education standpoint with the content we're providing, whether it's the app, podcast, whatever it is. The entertainment that is associated with having our guests on, again, external content that we can create, but also inspire them with the ability to do whatever they want to do or can do by supporting them financially. I think like those are the three pieces that we can hopefully provide. So it'll be really cool to be able to look back on. I'm excited for this because I think it'll be one that will be pretty incredible. So that's hopefully that answers your question.
No, absolutely does. That's awesome. And hopefully the podcast, I don't know if it's going to go another 100 years or 80 years, whatever it is, but maybe once that launches, we can have an update episode you can tell us about, and that'd be great to hear. But no, very, very cool. I'd love to hear about that further. And then last question, I mean, it's a great way to kind of end every episode. Went into the future, now we're going to the past. We're talking to, how old have we been when we finished high school? I don't remember. 16, 18, whatever you are, depending on your province. You're finishing high school. You're about to attend Brock. I'm about to attend U Ottawa, and whoever's listening about to attend, University X. what's something you wish you knew, or someone who is entering university that you now know? Whether it's a piece of advice, something you wish you've done differently, anything like that, you're like, hey, this is something 16 or 18-year-old David, Chris, Bobby Joe listening to this should know.
Say yes to things that even at the slightest pique your interest. Lift weights, as crazy as that is. Like, do resistance training. It's important for your health. And make sure to rest, because if you do those things, you're going to need time to recover. So say yes, lift weights, and recover.
Yeah. No, yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I like to end every episode on that note, but unless there's anything else you'd like to add, really appreciate you coming on. And, if we're both going for another 50 years on this podcast train, I'm sure we'll have a few more interactions in the future.
Dude, absolutely. I look forward to it. I sincerely appreciate you having me on. I appreciate everyone who's listening. Keep at it, man. This was an awesome show. 96. Kudos to you. Look forward to listening to many more.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if you want maybe do a quick little shout out before we do our own shout out at the end.
Sure. You can follow the Athletes Podcast on any social media platform, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Some we're more active on than others. We're working on getting everywhere, but you know what the grind is on the route. Thanks for featuring me on the show. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And then after you follow David and his podcast, Athletes Podcast, check out @Throughout Sports. That's it for episode 96. See you guys next week.